let's explore what we've seen happened in the past 2 years with the outgoing Chief Justice of Nigeria. Despite facing controversies over allegations of favoritism in judicial appointments, we see Chief Justice Ariwoola navigating the challenges and completing his tenure, unlike his predecessors, Walter Onohe and Tanko Mohammed, who resigned under controversial circumstances. What factors would you say contributed to his ability to weather the storm, and how will his 2-year tenure be assessed as he prepares to hand over in 6 days? We are going to get to the Senior Advocate of Nigeria shortly while we work on that connection. But we spoke earlier on in the day with Senior Advocates of Nigeria, Babatunde Ogala. It was exactly, I think it was yesterday on the news at 10, as we begin to explore some of the reactions trailing the nomination of Justice Kekere, particularly some of the concerns raised by a certain group with the Code of Conduct Bureau as to whether or not she declared assets while serving in other offices.
It is a bogus petition which has been sent to the Code of Conduct Bureau by perhaps a faceless group, a group of persons who call themselves Oduduwa or whatever, that are just bent on perhaps disrupting the smooth flow and the smooth transition in the judiciary and creating unnecessary tension. I think the Secretary of the CCB rightly said, he said, well, the petition has been sent, they would investigate, and I believe the investigation will also include the identity of the petitioners who are expected to come back and perhaps depose to some affidavits to verify the allegations they are making. In my humble opinion, if what I read in the papers is anything to go by, it is a very, very, very misplaced petition. And I say that with all sense of responsibility because I refer to the fact that they said that she didn't swear to make a declaration when she was appointed the chairman of the robbery tribunal in Lagos just after her appointment as a judge. Perhaps they need to be told and need to be educated that appointment as the chairman of a tribunal is just a ad hoc position, and what she was doing there was in her capacity as a judge of the High Court of Lagos State. Would the then law prescribe that the tribunal is to be headed by a judge? It's like saying the judge is asked to go and preside over an election petition tribunal now, and you expect that person to go and depose to go and make a declaration of assets before ascending or going to preside over the election petition tribunal. It's in my humble opinion, like I said, what I read in the paper is anything to go by. Some gaslighting and a crop of people who just want to maybe seek attention and cause some unnecessary tension in the transition process.
Babatunde Ogala, Senior Advocate of Nigeria there. It was on the news last night. I'm joined now by Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Abiodun Owonikoko. Mr. Owonikoko, thank you for joining us on the program. Let's begin with the outgoing Chief Justice. I asked earlier how you think he's been able to weather the storm, and how do you assess his 2 years in office? Recall that at some point, certain groups also wanted him to resign based on allegations of appointing his family members.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you this evening. The last 2 years, I've seen an era of stability in the operations of the Supreme Court. Recall that before Justice Olukayode Ariwoola was appointed, the last 2 Chief Justices did not leave their seats as envisaged. The first of the 2 was removed by an ex parte order of Code of Conduct Tribunal, obtained via what people call black market midnight injunction. And second, that left before Justice Ariwoola was by way of resignation. And that resignation was preceded by a unanimous decision of his colleagues on the Supreme Court bench requesting for certain remedies and reforms in terms of how the supreme power of the Chief Justice of Nigeria was being exercised, particularly as relates to their welfare. It's gratifying that today the successor to Justice Tanko has been able to navigate the affairs of the Supreme Court to the point where he's going to leave with his head raised high and even without controversy as to be expected for somebody occupying such a sensitive post. My Lord Justice Ariwoola is leaving honorably at the end of his tenure, as prescribed by the Constitution, which has been the tradition. The key points to observe is first is that he restored stability to the Supreme Court, number one. Two, he also was able to forge a collegiate leadership where it appears he had the confidence of all his
We're going to keep working on that connection to be able to connect adequately with Mr. Owonikoko, who is a senior advocate of Nigeria, as we continue to explore the past 2-year tenure of the outgoing Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Ariwoola, and as well as the person who has now been nominated by the Judicial Council. For staying the course on the program, under his tenure, we've seen some notable judgments determined by the Supreme Court, including the cash scarcity and local government autonomy cases. However, we also saw some conflicting court orders, especially from courts of coordinate jurisdiction and what many courts perceived indiscipline on the bench in the past 2 years. How significant are these challenges, and what tasks do you think are now awaiting the incoming CJN in addressing them?
Thank you very much. I think your question reminds me of one extraordinary achievement under the leadership of Justice Ariwoola. It happens to be that under his tenure, we underwent a general election petition cycle in 2022 and 23. And you observe that unlike the year before, the cycle before, most of controversial decisions of the trial and appellate courts were satisfactorily resolved by the Supreme Court, and there is not a single one of those cases determined by the Supreme Court which generated any serious concern or disputation about the correctness or fairness of the justice delivered. I give you a typical example of, say, Kano judgment at the tribunal and what happened at the Court of Appeal and how Supreme Court eventually resolved it. The same you can say of Jos, another volatile governorship election petition that portend grave fear for some form of public outcry. The Supreme Court navigated it very adroitly. Now, on a global scale, the Supreme Court under Justice Ariwoola bared its fangs in terms of its jurisdiction as what we all call a policy judgment court. If you recall, the cash confiscation slack redesign case threatened to undermine the possible transition to a new elected government in February 2023. It took the intervention of Supreme Court at the highest level and their skillful application of wisdom to navigate the country out of that crisis. That is going to be a high point of one of the greatest achievement of Supreme Court as a stabilizing force in our constitutional democracy, because that authority decided one fundamental question as to where the sovereignty lies in Nigeria. Supreme Court, in that case for the first time, said sovereignty actually lies in the individual Nigerians who constitute the territory of Nigeria, and that the president and the executive arm hold that sovereignty in trust. that has serious implications for our democratic values, because it means at the end of the day, we all know that ultimate authority for governance is not those who were elected. Rather, it is those who elected them. You also mentioned the local government financial autonomy judgment. You will recall that before his lordship came into office, there have been several judgments pronounced by the Supreme Court in which they have condemned the attitude of governors dissolving local government, appointing caretakers, even refusing to obey judgment of the courts, until the President Attorney General, as a consummate litigation expert, approached the Supreme Court some few months ago and presented the case, which created a basis for the Supreme Court, not being a court that render advisory opinion, to now weigh in on that issue, and we know where the country is today. Everybody has been hailing the Supreme Court, the Attorney General, and Mr. President for taking that bold initiative to restore democracy at the local government grassroots level. And a few other of those cases where Supreme Court has stood firmly and asserted its independence. So I think that from Justice Ariwoola to Justice Kekere, the chances are that all along, Justice Kekere has been the vice chairman of the Judicial Council.
Just a minute. Talking about Justice Kekere, Mr. Onwuekoko, with the president's approval, we're actually likely going to see, a second female CJN, no doubt. But the tradition has always been that the second in line succeeds the outgoing CJN. Do you expect a departure from this precedent, given the petition that just surfaced at the Code of Conduct Bureau, questioning whether or not she declared her assets, while she occupied other offices in Lagos?
Thank you for that question. Let's start by appreciating the fact that the procedure for appointment, discipline, and removal of justice of Supreme Court is not governed by Code of Conduct or Code of Conduct Tribunal. It's governed by a provision of the National Judicial Council, working young. Or sanctioning them. The body authorized to midwife that process beyond getting to Senate for confirmation of their decision is the National Judicial Council. And so if a person like Justice Kekere joined the bench as far back as 1990, the lower bench, then the High Court 1996, Court of Appeal 2004, Supreme Court 2013 or thereabout, and on each of these occasions, he has to undergo vetting by the relevant security agencies and the relevant authorities entitled to review her qualification for the office. It will be rather mischievous for anybody at this stage, when she's still already a serving Justice of Supreme Court and just about to be elevated to the position of the Chief Justice of Nigeria, for people to now spring up allegations about what allegedly happened under the military dictatorship, not even under the 1999 Constitution, and say that is a reason why he should not be considered for appointment to the office of Chief Justice of Nigeria. Anybody actually who is fit to be CJ, to be Justice of Supreme Court, is actually automatically deemed by the principle of regularity to be qualified to become CJN. So whatever qualified her ladyship to be on the bench from High Court, Court of Appeal to Supreme Court for all these years without blemish would speak for her in terms of whether she's now suitable to assume.
I hear you, Mr. Onwuekoko, and I'm sure that in the coming days we're also going to get some more clarity to that. But before we go, what factors would you say have contributed to the relatively short tenure of Chief Justices in Nigeria, with most serving for only just about 2 or 3 years, except for Justice Mohammed Uwais, who served for 6 years between, I think, 1995 and 2006?
The reason is historical. Justice Uwais got to Supreme Court at under 50. He was in his 40s when he got to Supreme Court. So, and being that the system works based on pecking order, he quickly rose through the ranks, as most of his colleagues were very elderly and they were retiring at 65 when he became a member of the Justice of the Supreme Court, unlike now when it's 70. So by the time Justice Uwais became CJN, he still had, even at 65, even at 70, he still had sufficient time spent almost 12 years, because he left in 2006 as Chief Justice of Nigeria. You will be surprised, people don't know, Justice Uwais is still alive today, kicking and living a quiet life in Katsina State. So the reason why it hasn't been like that is that by the time Justice Uwais was going to leave, most of the colleagues at the Supreme Court with him, even though they got to Supreme Court after him, were much older in age. And so essentially, by the time he left, most of them were approaching their retirement ages. So after his lordship, Justice Begore spent 6 months. What do
you make of this?
Really like 2 years or so. What do you make? Has been the reason. But with the way things are going, and full complement of Supreme Court that we have now, a lot of younger members of the bench at the Court of Appeal are now at the Supreme Court. I can mention somebody, an hereditary one like Justice Idris, Justice Abiru. These are still fairly young, but they are even much older than Justice. Some of them are older than Justice Uwais when they go to Supreme Court. So I guess that the process of retirement and the rest, Justice Gekiri, for instance, because her ladyship was fairly young too when she got to Supreme Court. By the time she assumes office now, she will have close to about 4 years.
Mr. Wonigoko,
yes.
What do you make of this mandatory retirement at 70 years and the call for it to be reviewed, since the executive, for instance, don't seem to have that kind of limitation?
Well, executives are elected officials, whereas judicial officers are appointed and they rise through the ranks. You also have to appreciate the fact that given the parlor state of administration of justice in terms of being resourced, most of our justices, with few of them that have the grace of God, they hardly live long after they retire because of the stress of the work. I've had occasion to speak to some of them, and I don't think majority of them want to stay beyond 70, because some of them spend like 40 years on the bench. They've not had more time for the family. The children went to school while they were busy on the bench, being transferred from place to place. The little time they have after retirement is to actually spend with their grandchildren, not really with their children anymore. So I believe that given that we have so much quality and resource persons at the lower level, we can do well to stay at 70. However, it may well be that the constitution may accommodate what you can call some form of invited judges. When they have critical cases of constitutional importance, they can have advisory judges among retired judges who can sit, but they won't decide, but they can use the benefit of their experience to support the court, but not for the retirement day to be.
I hear you clearly. I'm afraid we have completely run out of time. Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Abiodun Wonigoko, thank you so much for your contribution.
It's my pleasure. And I wish my lady, Justice Gekiri, a successful tenure. And my retiring CJN, Justice Ariwoola, a healthy and happy retirement. Thank you so very much.
That's our show tonight, everyone. You can watch it again at midnight and at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I am Nifemi Oguntoye.